That's when Alan Dershowitz smirked and called her law degree a joke. What happened next left even his defenders speechless. The panel had been tense from the start, but this wasn't tension anymore. This was something else. The kind of quiet that fills a room when someone crosses a line they can't uncross. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, a twisted smile curling across his face. The remark wasn't an argument. It wasn't debate. It was a dismissal, launched with the practiced sneer of a man who'd spent decades above challenge and moments away from being proven completely wrong. The camera cut to her reporter Jasmine Crockett, and in that split second, without a word, something shifted. Her eyes didn't flare with anger. They sharpened. A flicker of a smile. Not surprise, not pain. Something colder. Calculated. Resolute. He saw it too. You could almost feel the air tighten. People leaned forward. Moderators froze, unsure of what was about to happen. The others on the panel suddenly looked smaller, less certain. This wasn't supposed to happen. You don't mock the credentials of a black woman lawyer on national television, let alone one trained in both law and combating the very systems that routinely try to belittle women like her. Without paying a price. But that's the thing. Alan thought there wouldn't be one. Because when he spoke, he wasn't just talking to her. He was talking to every old guard ally, every institutional gatekeeper who'd refused to believe that someone like Jasmine Crockett belonged in the seat she was in. And in that moment he didn't see her rise. He saw his own legacy crashing. Down! She straightened her papers, cleared her throat, looked directly at him. And then she started to speak. But before we get to that mic drop, you need to understand why this moment mattered so much. Why a Harvard professor's smug swipe at a Texas congresswoman set fire to the fabric of a country already questioning who gets to hold the mic, and who's told to earn it all over again. This wasn't about law school. It was about power. And who gets to wield it without permission. America doesn't just debate policies anymore. It debates who's worthy of being in the room, who's allowed to sit at the table, who's trusted with the mic, and who's told, implicitly or explicitly, to be grateful they were even invited. And that moment between Alan Dershowitz and Jasmine Crockett, it wasn't just a clash of legal opinions. It was a reckoning between two versions of what qualified looks like in the United States. Alan represents the old archetype. White, Ivy League, unchallenged. He spent decades basking in the glow of credentials and connections. Supreme Court briefs, television interviews, access to presidents. His word was gospel in the elite legal circles. Until his gospel started slipping into something else entirely. A kind of condescension disguised as scholarship. A habit of punching down without consequence. Why? Because men like him are rarely told they went too far. But Jasmine? She's always known the room can turn on her before she even opens her mouth. A black woman from the South, a legislator with courtroom battle scars instead of headlines. She built her credibility brick by brick. No inherited halo from academia or pedigree, only grit. And when she does speak, it's with the kind of clarity that's often labeled too much by those uncomfortable with truth. Too loud, too aggressive, too sharp. As if passion negates intellect, as if a bold voice can't carry centuries of silenced brilliance. That's the real split. Because this debate, this insult, wasn't about a diploma. It was about the psychology of power in America, about how quickly people retreat to weaponizing decorum and credentials when they feel their dominance slipping, and make no mistake, Alan felt something slipping. The country is changing. Women like Jasmine Crockett are no longer the exception. They're the next chapter. They pull no punches. They come prepared. And they refuse to shrink to make legacy names feel taller. So, when Alan launched his jab that day, it wasn't random. It was instinct. The last move of a man used to silence being his closing argument. But this time, the room didn't move the way he wanted. His words didn't land with authority. They landed with arrogance. Because more and more people understand. Now, respect doesn't come from the seal on your diploma. It comes from the truth in your tone, the purpose in your presence, the path you walked to get to the mic. Dershowitz may have had Harvard, but Crockett had Harlem, Houston, and hundreds of court battles under her belt. She didn't study the system. She survived it. Then she beat it. That law degree he mocked? It wasn't just a credential. It was a weapon sharpened by everything America threw at her and still failed to stop. No, this wasn't a debate between equals. This was an attempt to diminish someone who earned her place without needing anyone's blessing. And what made the jab even more infuriating was Alan's past and the hypocrisy hiding in plain sight. Alan Dershowitz didn't always walk into rooms with a smirk. There was a time when his name stood for something, or at least seemed to. Legendary Harvard law professor, civil liberties warrior, the man who'd take on the tough cases no one else would touch. He defended the Constitution like it was sacred text, not perfect, but precious. He stood beside unpopular defendants not because they were innocent, but because their rights mattered. And in doing so, he became the rare legal intellect who commanded respect from liberals and conservatives alike. At least, that used to be the story. But somewhere along the way, Alan stopped teaching and started taunting. Maybe it was the cameras, the panels, the endless invitations to weigh in on every dog-whistle legal battle gripping the nation. Or maybe it was something darker, the kind of cynicism that takes root when brilliance is no longer about lighting the path but blinding your opponents. He'd become a fixture on right-wing television, a permanent guest in culture war debates, seated conveniently beside men who'd never read a legal brief but knew exactly how to stir outrage. He wasn't challenging abuse of power anymore. He was justifying it. And then came the contradictions. Once a vocal critic of unchecked executive authority, Dershowitz flipped into an apologist for Donald Trump's strongman style, defending everything, from impeachment dodging to election narrative manipulation, with immaculate legal detachment. He claimed presidents couldn't be impeached for abuse of power because it wasn't literally listed in the Constitution, a position so specific, so surgically narrow, that even casual observers could see what was happening. This wasn't legal scholarship. It was legal shielding. And when the accusations surrounding Jeffrey Epstein drew global attention, Dershowitz didn't stay silent. He jumped right in, defending himself against allegations, yes, but also defending Epstein's legal treatment, doubling down with postures that felt less rule of law and more rule of influence. Journalists started asking, had Alan Dershowitz lost the thread? He used to talk about justice like it was a lighthouse, untouchable, a guiding light in the nation's storm. Now he sounded more like a man obsessed with his own relevance, wielding legal nuance like a sword, not to protect people but to slice away accountability from people in power. That's the trouble with Alan. He didn't just change, he pivoted. From legal thinker to moral contortionist, from defender of the marginalized to attack dog for the already empowered. And people noticed. His once-admired commentary began to sour. Critics weren't just disagreeing, they were embarrassed. Embarrassed at the way he dismissed younger activists, especially women and people of color, how he twisted logic to undermine their legitimacy while couching it in jurisprudence, as if law were only pure when he spoke it. And that's where Jasmine Crockett enters the frame. Because Alan wasn't just mocking her law degree. He was mocking the very idea that someone like her loud, black, unapologetically herself could be both legally brilliant and morally centered. He saw her public presence not as a contribution, but as a threat to his intellectual throne. That's what bullies do when they know they've lost the room. They try to make it about the building, not the fire inside. He had underestimated her. He thought his name was power. He thought his smirk still carried weight. He believed that one calculated jab was enough to remind a black woman lawyer she was still on his turf. But this wasn't Harvard. This was America in 2025. The classrooms had spilled into courtrooms. The courtrooms had become congressional halls, and the future wasn't listening to Alan's tired syllables anymore. Because while he defended insurrectionists, she defended the Constitution under threat. While he joked from the sidelines, she walked into legislative hearings with receipts and resolve. This wasn't just a clash of opinions, this was a living allegory. A mirror held up to America's obsession with old names and old power. And Alan, for all his years and accolades, was about to learn that when you mock people who had to climb higher just to stand on your level, you better brace for the fall. He picked the wrong opponent, and she'd earned every word of what came next. Jasmine Crockett didn't come from corridors of inherited power. She came from East Texas, where dreams are shaped less by legacy and more by fire, the kind that comes from constantly being told you're too bold, too loud, too different. Before she ever set foot in Congress, Jasmine was standing up in courtrooms across Texas, not to defend corporations or fill a resume page, but to protect the people who couldn't afford to lose. Tenants facing eviction, kids facing charges, hard-working families forgotten by the system. She didn't just go to law school. She went to war, every day, with the cold bureaucracy that dismissed people who looked like her. No silver spoon, no anonymous donors. Just case files, coffee-fueled nights, and a relentless refusal to be anything other than exactly who she was. The courtroom wasn't a place where she was respected immediately. It was a place where she was questioned. Judges asking if she was really the attorney. Opposing counsel underestimating her until it was too late. She didn't walk into rooms expecting respect. She earned it, line by line, case by case. And when a seat in the Texas legislature opened up, she didn't see it as a promotion. She saw it as a new battlefield. Because the truth is, Jasmine never wanted to be famous. She wanted to be useful. From the moment she arrived in Congress, that courtroom grit followed her. She wasn't there to pose for filtered photos or whisper rehearsed talking points. She came to speak truth, and speak fast. In hearings, she cut through lies like cross-examination. Her words weren't decorous. They were surgical. When some commentators rolled their eyes at her Texas drawl or her dramatic lashes, she didn't apologize. She pushed harder, louder, sharper, because she knew exactly what those eye rolls meant. They weren't rejecting her tone. They were rejecting her existence. Jasmine's presence disrupted everything people like Dershowitz had long considered sacred. That brilliance has a zip code. That respectability has a dress code. That law is only real if it's wrapped in Latin and whispered in a think tank. But Jasmine turned that on its head. When she questioned witnesses, they squirmed. When she broke down statutes, even seasoned journalists had to pause and rewind. She had the receipts, the rhythm, and the rage, all balanced with razor-sharp discipline. She reminded people of another kind of lawyer, the kind who climbed up from nothing, who had to memorize statutes while working jobs, who didn't take a single credential for granted. She wasn't bred in prestige. She was refined in resistance. And when it finally clicked, when people realized she was more than just a fiery freshman or a viral moment maker, it wasn't because she raised her voice. It was because she raised the bar. So when Alan Dershowitz said her law degree was a joke, it wasn't just offensive, it was lazy. It was the last desperate gasp of a man who couldn't silence her with arguments, so he tried to discredit her foundation. But Jasmine had been here before. She knew exactly what it meant to be underestimated. She also knew how to use that dismissal as fuel, not fury. Because with Jasmine, clapbacks aren't impulsive. They're precision attacks, strategized, sharpened, and designed with impact in mind. Alan didn't know that. He saw her as an easy target, a rising star who'd burn out under pressure, someone with flair but no flame. What he didn't see, what he couldn't see, was that she had been tempered. Every insult made her sharper. Every attempt to silence her only tuned her voice. So when he looked across the dais and made that offhand remark, questioning her law degree, he wasn't just challenging her. He was invoking every courtroom where she wasn't believed, every hallway where she was minimalized, every panel where she had to qualify her brilliance just to be taken seriously. And Jasmine? She didn't flinch. She arched one eyebrow, barely, straightened a paper, breathed once, and then sat up. He thought she was a momentary hiccup. He was about to watch her become the storm. So when Alan took the shot, he had no idea who he was playing with. It started with a laugh. The kind that doesn't fill a room, it cuts through it. Alan Dershowitz let out a low, patronizing chuckle as Repured Jasmine Crockett finished a sharp line of questioning. He leaned forward slightly, squinting like he was inspecting something. Beneath him, then came the line. I'm not quite sure where she got her law degree. Pause. Smirk. Eye roll. But it clearly wasn't from a real constitutional scholar. There it was. You could hear the click of phones being unlocked under the table, aides suddenly typing, clips already being clipped. Moderators blinked. The panel held its breath. Had he really just gone there? To the viewers at home, it sounded like a throwaway jab. But to anyone who's sat in rooms like that, to anyone who's ever been talked down to with a smile, it echoed like a shot fired, and Jasmine? She didn't flinch. No defensive hand gesture. No flustered attempt to cut in. She simply raised her chin. Slowly, deliberately. The corner of her mouth curled, not into a grin but into something cleaner, sharper, a different kind of silence, washed over the room. Not the stunned quiet of insult, the cold, anticipatory silence of arrival. She adjusted her mic. One of the aides dropped their pen. He thought she would fold, or sputter, or brush it off. He was wrong. We cut to Alan, still wearing that thin layer of smugness, still convinced the crowd was with him. But the tide had shifted. Everyone in that room could feel it. That invisible current when control changes hands. It happens fast. The villain overspeaks. The protagonist doesn't blink. And suddenly, we are all waiting for the clapback. And Jasmine knew it. She took a breath, not as a pause, but as permission. You could almost hear the camera operators recalibrating, like they knew what was coming would live far beyond broadcast. This wasn't going to be a rebuttal. This was about to become a reckoning. In Texas courtrooms, Jasmine had learned the value of timing. You don't speak to defend, you speak to dismantle. And she had spent years being underestimated just long enough to prepare the perfect kill shot. Alan had just handed her the opportunity of a lifetime. To peel back every layer of condescension. He wore like armor and reveal what was underneath. A man who'd once spoken truth to power, now terrified that power had found a new face. And this face? It belonged to a black woman who wouldn't blink, wouldn't back down, and knew the Constitution as well as anyone on that panel, including him. She looked directly at him. Not through him. At him. The whole country leaned in. He dismissed her as a momentary hiccup. He was about to watch her become the storm. And then she delivered the kind of rebuttal that rewrites reputations. Jasmine Crockett adjusted the mic, took a beat, and began, not with anger, but with composure so deliberate it was disarming. Well, for the record, she said, her voice calm but cutting, I graduated from the Thurgood Marshall School of Law, named after the first black Supreme Court, Justice. A man who didn't wait for permission to speak, didn't need a Harvard pin to prove his worth, and definitely never mocked the next generation for daring to speak truth with a different accent. The air snapped like dry ice. Somewhere behind the cameras, someone let out a short gasp. She leaned in slightly, never raising her voice. And unlike you, Professor Dershowitz, I didn't build my legal legacy by hopping from courtroom defense to cable news spin cycle. I built it defending people who didn't belong to power, people who didn't have your luxury of being called controversial. Because when you're black and a woman, the word they use isn't controversial. It's angry, it's dangerous, it's unqualified. She smiled, polite, surgical. Funny how that works, isn't it? Dershowitz tried to interject. A cough, a hand movement. But she cut right through it. You seem to think credentials are only valid if they come from your exact institutions. But I'm not impressed by proximity to power. I don't need to have taught at Harvard to see hypocrisy in high definition. Murmur ripple. Audible now. And let's talk about that hypocrisy, she continued. You once defended civil liberties like they were sacred. You called out politicians who abused power. And you wrote books about how freedom dies when people stop questioning authority. And yet, here you are, mocking an elected congresswoman who dares to speak with precision simply because my path didn't run through your little clubhouse? Clip-worthy. She didn't blink. Her tempo was flawless, each sentence landing like courtroom testimony. Measured, documented, inevitable. I've been cross-examined by judges who thought my skin color meant I was the defendant. I've been overlooked by colleagues who assumed my voice wasn't the room's smartest just because it wasn't the loudest. And every single time I've walked away letting the law speak for me. She pointed gently toward Dershowitz with her pen. No theatrics, just control. So don't you dare tell me my law degree is a joke. Because the only thing laughable here is the idea that a man clinging to his cable news clout gets to pretend. He's the sole gatekeeper of legal intellect. Another voice in the room, off camera, could be heard saying softly, "Wow." Clips of the exchange were already hitting X, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts before she even finished. One post read, "She just ended Dershowitz without raising her voice once." Crockett clapped back, but Jasmine wasn't finished. "Let's be real," she said, now speaking as if to the entire country. "This isn't just about me. What you did, Professor, is what they all do. In courtrooms, on committees, on social media. Mock us, minimize us, undermine us, not because we've done something wrong, but because we've done something right." She paused, letting the truth hang. "We're clear, direct, and maybe we wear hoops and speak with cadence and clarity you can't code switch away from. And suddenly, we're a threat to the order you were promised would always be yours." Audible applause. At least 2 hand slaps against wood. She looked away from him now, speaking to something bigger. "Here's what law is to me. It's not a debate club with fancy ties and condescending sighs. It's the tool we're supposed to use to protect people, not insulate the powerful. And my voice, my law school, my courtroom record, they all led me here. So I suggest you update your definition of what a real lawyer looks like. Because she's not asking for your permission." Pause. "And she's not going anywhere." In less than 10 minutes, she'd transformed the entire dynamic. She didn't just return fire. She dismantled the entire weapon, piece by piece, and handed it back without fingerprints. Dershowitz sat back, staring forward. His usual swagger? Gone. No smirk, no clever parry, no filibuster logic. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't a response. It was retreat. One user posted a split screen. Him, silent, her, mid-sentence. Caption, "When arrogance meets receipts." Another wrote, "I have never seen someone so thoroughly demolished with this much elegance and restraint." Lawyering. Levels. Crockett clapped back. And then came the endorsements. A sitting senator reposted her speech with the words, "Textbook. Teach this in law schools." A pop superstar commented, "Big Crockett energy. Every woman in every boardroom knows. This face." By the end of the day, Baker Crockett clapback was the top trending phrase in the U.S. She didn't just defend herself. She defended every woman who has been laughed at in rooms like that. Every young professional who smiled through the smirks. Every first-gen student told they weren't polished enough. Every daughter told to shrink before she speaks. And Alan? He had nothing left to say. Within minutes, the moment exploded across every social platform. Clips of Jasmine's takedown. Crisp, cool, and devastating. Flooded timelines like a rising wave. TikTok creators were already stitching reactions. Gasps, slow claps, and speechless stares as she dismantled Dershowitz line by line. On X, the hashtag #ChalkCrockett clapback surged from local buzz to nationwide trend in under 2 hours. One thread, featuring her full uninterrupted quote, "I don't need to have taught at Harvard to see hypocrisy in high definition," racked up 3 million views by nightfall. A constitutional law professor at Georgetown reposted it with the caption, "This wasn't a takedown. It was a masterclass." News outlets scrambled to keep up. MSNBC ran the clip twice in the same hour, followed by a segment called What Jasmine Crockett Just Taught Us About Power. Even CNN's typically poker-faced midday anchor let slip a smile during the playback. But it wasn't just left-leaning spaces going off-script. The Fox News panel split live on air. One commentator, a former prosecutor, tried to brush it off. "She got emotional, that's all." But another, visibly stunned, replied, "No, that was surgical. I don't like her politics, but she cut him clean." The moment was breaking containment. And that's when everyone came in. A-list celebrities reposted the video. Civil rights groups issued statements praising her poise. Legal scholars dropped video essays dissecting her cadence, her rhetorical framing, her flawless courtroom to Congress style. But the loudest applause? It didn't come from institutions. It came from the people. Black women in law. Young, seasoned, retired, flooded the hashtags with stories. Law students talked about watching, the clip between classes. Lawyers posted photos of themselves watching, tears in their eyes. One woman wrote, "I'm in my 3rd year of law school at an HBCU. I've been silenced, shamed, told to dim my light. Tonight I watched Representative Jasmine Crockett make the entire world hear our voices. I ain't never felt this proud." Another proudly shared her courtroom headshot under the caption, "Let's get one thing straight. Our degrees are not jokes. They are proof we survived everything they said we couldn't." It wasn't just pride. It was vindication. You didn't need to agree with all of Jasmine's politics to see what she had just done. She had flipped the cultural script written by generations of ego-driven men who rode elite status as a free pass. And she did it without raising her voice, without resorting to insults, without evading a single point. She showed America what it looks like when character meets credentials. When someone who's had to outrun stereotypes decides to stand still and let the facts speak for her. Even unlikely sources tipped their hats. A retired, conservative-leaning judge on a legal podcast said bluntly, "She was extraordinary. The kind of command you can't teach. That professor got taught big time." Members of Congress released side-by-side comparisons of Crockett's speech and Dershowitz's shrug. Side by side, they looked like past and future, echo and clarity. But beyond the headlines, beyond viral moments, it was the emotional resonance that made the difference. Because in just 90 seconds, Jasmine Crockett had done more than win a sparring match. She'd created a moment of cultural justice. For every woman told to moderate her voice, for every black professional told her degree needed extra validation, for every first-generation law student asked, "But where'd you go to school?" For every single person who's had to explain their existence before being allowed to speak. That's why the moment mattered. It wasn't just about Dershowitz and Crockett. It was about arrogance and erasure, about the rooms we enter and the seats we're told to justify, about what happens when someone dares to walk in anyway, uninvited, unstoppable, unapologetic. And while the backlash tried to gather, think pieces critiquing her tone, disingenuous calls for civility, washed-up pundits calling it unbecoming, it was already too late. The people had validated her. The message landed. Jasmine had defended herself with perfect clarity. But her final words in that encounter weren't about her at all. Because what she said next, she said it for all of us. Later, as the storm of reactions settled into something bigger, more lasting, someone asked Jasmine how it felt to win the exchange. She paused, and without missing a beat, she said, "You can mock my degree, but you can't mock what I do with it." That line didn't trend. It resonated, deeper than a hashtag. Because it wasn't about a viral moment. It was about legacy, purpose, identity. It was about standing in rooms meant to exclude you and saying, "I'm here to work, not to prove I belong." For Jasmine Crockett, this was never about Alan Dershowitz. It was about the invisible math that's ruled American power for generations. The unspoken calculations that equate pedigree with intellect, race with rage, femininity with fragility. She saw it, lived it, outmaneuvered it. And when the moment came, she reframed it. The controversy wasn't a detour. It was a mirror. Because when someone mocks your credentials, what they're really saying is, you've arrived too far, too fast, and you're making the wrong people uncomfortable. But Jasmine wasn't interested in decorum for the sake of hierarchy. She was interested in something greater, dignity. And that's what her entire career, her presence in Congress, her command of that moment was really about: reclaiming what dignity sounds like, what it fights for, what it refuses to apologize for. The law, she said, wasn't written to intimidate. It was written to protect. So don't ask me where I studied it. Ask me how I use it. She didn't raise her voice because truth doesn't need volume. It needs clarity. And she gave it, line by line, from a place of service, not ego. Justice, not vanity. She wasn't after applause. She was building accountability. Because if the only voices we validate come dressed in old power and outdated privilege, then we're not protecting democracy. We're just decorating it. And Jasmine? She broke through the decor. She asked bigger questions without even needing to say them aloud. Who gets to lead this country? Who do we hand the mic to? And who do we silence by claiming they're too bold, too brash, too unqualified? What if degrees didn't gatekeep value? And what if titles were less about who gave them, and more about what you do with them? In Jasmine's world, in the future she's helping shape, the law is a weapon only when it's pointed at injustice, and the mic isn't something you borrow. It's something you earn by telling the truth, even when your voice shakes, even when the room is stacked against you. I didn't come here for comfort. I came here for clarity, she said in a follow-up interview. I don't care if you remember me. I care if you remember what I stood for, because she wasn't just defending herself. She was defending every voice that's been talked over, every resume that's been tossed aside, every accent that's been mocked, every law school that wasn't Ivy, every single powerful presence that didn't look or sound like the last generation's idea of leadership. In a nation still learning who it will be, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a moment. She reminded us what real power is, and she showed us that dignity, not clout, is the only credential that matters now. But this story isn't over just yet, because the next thing she said was a message to all of us. Alan poked at a law degree. Jasmine delivered a legacy. What she did wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a cultural reset. A reminder that the most powerful arguments aren't shouted, they're lived. In a moment designed to humiliate, she stood taller. In a system built to dismiss, she made herself undeniable. With composure, courage, and conviction, she reminded America what brilliance actually looks like. And it doesn't always wear Ivy League prestige. Sometimes it wears bold lashes, speaks with Southern rhythm, carries itself not with arrogance, but with purpose. Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend her resume. She held up a mirror to a system that too often confuses clout with contribution. And that's where you come in, because if you've ever been underestimated, degraded, or doubted, this story is yours too. If you've ever walked into a room and felt judged before you spoke, if you've ever been told to tone it down, wait your turn, explain your credentials. Again, share this. Not just for the views, but for the value. Because stories like Jasmine's don't just clap back, they break ceilings, they rewrite the rules, they echo into every classroom, courtroom, and boardroom that still doesn't see us coming. Subscribe for more moments where dignity outshines ego. Comment and tell us, when did you prove someone wrong? Share this with someone who needs to know. You don't need their permission to speak, just your power to keep going. This wasn't just a moment. It was a movement. And it's only just begun.